Good evening and welcome to the Church of Christ on Fishinger Road. I'm so glad that you've decided to join us tonight. We have a very exciting mental health seminar that's taking place over the next couple of hours this evening and then also tomorrow morning from 9 to 11 a.m. We would love to have you back to join us for the tomorrow morning portion as well. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. Our presenter this evening is Dr. Ryan Fraser. He is a professor at Freed-Hardeman University. And when I was there as an undergraduate student, took a few classes with him and just hit it off. He is a wonderful friend, a wonderful minister, preaches at the Bethel Springs Church of Christ around Henderson, Tennessee, and an incredibly educated professor. And really the way that he is able to present these topics is excellent, is informative, but also is very applicable. In the time that I had him as a professor and now, he has changed from the strict mental health focus that he had at the university to the youth ministry route. And so he has a lot of experience and a lot of years of teaching and learning about mental health, but specifically how it's applied at an adolescent level, how to teach parents about it and any concerned Christian adult of what to do around these topics that sometimes feel like they're a little bit overwhelming, especially when we see them interacting with our youth today. In just a moment, I'm going to have our elder who helped put all of this together, Ron Spangler, lead us in a prayer. And then after that, Ryan is going to conduct the first of 4 lectures, the first being over teen depression. And then later this evening, we'll be talking about teen self-harm. These are pretty heavy topics, and so if there are questions about them afterwards, there will be a brief period where we can have a question and answer with Dr. Fraser. I'll have a microphone and can come around after his first lecture about depression for any questions that you might have for him that he would be able to answer for you live in this format. And then we'll take a short break before we start back up, probably around 8 o'clock for the section over teen self-harm, again concluding with a question and answer. For anyone who's visiting with us, restrooms are in the back, and we have coffee in our kitchen downstairs in room C. But thank you for joining us tonight.
Let's pray together. God, we thank you for this time that we can come together. Thank you for Dr. Fraser being here to help lead a discussion, to help us to understand more about the difficulties facing so many in our society, our young people, and just others who struggle with various mental difficulties. We pray that you'll be with Dr. Fraser as he brings us these lessons and help us to support each other as your church. Help us always to reach out that hand to anyone who needs our encouragement. We thank you for this family that's here. Through your son's name we pray. Amen. Dr. Fraser.
It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. I'll tell you what, it's rough coming out on a Friday night for anything, and especially for a seminar. So it was rough for me, so I know it's going to be extremely rough for y'all, but I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate so much Ron and Landon and Greg and all the ministers here, Brandon and others that I know and appreciate. I've been a Freed-Hardeman almost 17, I'm in my 17th year. And as Landon was saying, I came there originally. I was a Freed grad, but I came there to teach in the clinical mental health master's program and did that for about 13 years and taught all sorts of classes, and that program is designed for people. A lot of them were in ministry too, but men and women that were seeking a master's degree in clinical mental health and to get the license wherever they are as a licensed professional counselor. 4 years ago, I was invited to move over to the Bible department for the College of Biblical Studies. I guess I need to say that properly. The College of Biblical Studies, and also the Graduate School of Theology. And At the undergrad level, it's been such a delight because for my first decade plus, I got to teach very few undergrads. It was mainly grad students and a few upper division. I only taught one undergrad class that I taught 26 times, by the way, but it was family and individual counseling. I would teach that every semester. And then I've loved being able to teach freshmen and sophomores. I mean, just the energy that they bring. And I do Acts of the Apostles and Intro to Christianity and some courses like that, as well as continuing to teach personal counseling. It's really a Christian counseling based course, and then classes related to youth and family ministry. And so what a pleasure to be there. And I head up the Masters in Pastoral Care and Counseling program. So that's been a great program. And at times Landon's been involved with that, and others that take some of those courses. Even Ron took a course, but he was just, I think, was it the family ministry class that you took, Ron? Yeah. So teach it every 2 years, and that was right in the middle of COVID, and I think he was just really bored. And he was in that class. I was going, who is this Ron guy that's in this class from Columbus, one of the elders up here? And it was great to have him in that class. And there were others working on the MDivs or MA in ministry and other groups. But I'll be teaching that class again, Ron, so you can take it again so you can pass it this time. Wink, wink. Ron aced it. He was great. And I know these guys right here, Ron and Diane, from Wichita Falls, Jackson, Tennessee days. And we were in church there together at North Jackson. So a lot of connections here. Well, I hope over the next couple days to share some things that are practical, A, biblical, B, real, C, and hopefully uplifting in some ways, that to show that there is hope, so hopeful. And talking about mental health issues can be, excuse the pun, but can be kind of depressing, right? I do provide private counseling. I am licensed in the state, and I work with a lot of teenagers and people of all ages, honestly, and some of the specialties that I work with in my small private practice is I work a lot with anxiety issues and OCD, depression, addictions, marriage and family things. So I'm kind of a generalist, and I really enjoy that work. But we're going to start out with some dad jokes just to get us going, right? So who likes dad jokes? If you don't, just get out right now, right? We're going to take a look at a few. So knock, knock. Who's there? Noble. Noble who? Let's try this again, guys. This is a knock, knock joke. Knock, knock. Noble. No bell, so I just knocked. Definitely a dad joke. Remember, there's a fine line between hyphenated words. A fine line between hyphenated words. Some of y'all going, what? Okay, you need to think about that maybe. Taking a dog named Shark to the beach is a very bad idea. All right? When does a joke become a dad joke? When it's fully grown. All right? So I've got a few of these along the way, and I've been surprised at Frida Hardeman when we do the teenage lectureship. Though the teens might act like they don't like them at first, they love these jokes, and they'll come up and say, hey, let me tell you a dad joke. So they're always filling us up with jokes. But we're talking about a matter that's no joking matter. So we're going to discuss in our first time period, and I'm going to try and manage our time to allow for some questions for each of the sessions, and feel free to ask anything. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer, but I'll try to bring some practical wisdom and some ideas just for these issues. But teen depression is tough. The teenage years are difficult in and of themselves. I thoroughly enjoy working with 12 through 18-year-olds, and but I know that a lot of the kids that I work with are coming from broken families. Some have gone through tremendous loss and grief. Here, more than a year ago, was working with a young lady whose boyfriend had died he had drowned in a boating accident. And, so some things like that come up, and kids deal with some hard issues, right? So teenage years can be just a struggle in that transition period to adulthood. So that's difficult anyway. But this time period has some different pieces to it, such as angst or anxiety that's part of that. I've got a couple kids I'm working with right now that are seniors in high school, and they kind of don't want to graduate from high school because there's fear of, I've got to go to the next step of college or job or, maturity. So there's a lot of self-doubt. There's often raging hormones in pubescence, confusion, and sometimes the sweetest kids can turn into unrecognizable people during the teenage years. So it can be a tough time. I've got two kids that are now 25 and 22, and my daughter's been married almost 5 years. Actually, she was young when she got married, but she's wrapping up her education. I tell you what, when Olivia and Austin left the nest at our house, they walked out, and Missy and I went, kind of got our life back, but we love our kids. But also being parents to teenagers was challenging, right? It's tough to be a parent or a grandparent, and many kids are grappling with lots of insecurities that could lead down a dangerous path of antisocial behavior such as violence, substance abuse, and even self-harm that we'll talk about of some later on tonight. And so something that didn't do us any favors was the pandemic, right? And so the pandemic hit back in the beginning of 2020. It threw a lot of people off kilter, threw me off kilter. I found myself being just really unmotivated and really hard to work from home and teach from my living room, on the computer. But for teenagers, wow, it was tough. And several of them now are in college, and we still speak about what the last 3 years has been like for them and the things that they missed out on. And so reports that are out there currently, just taking a look at the trajectory of mental health in the U.S. and worldwide, sees that teenagers were impacted more than anyone else when it comes to some of the psychological difficulties around this. And schools closed down everywhere for a long period of time. Kids felt isolated because of distance learning. They weren't able to interact with their friends, which they need that social interaction. There was a lot of stress, there was a lot of loneliness, and also a lot of fear around what this meant to them, to the future, just to physical health and just what life was going to look like. And so we saw a rise in teenage mental health claims from insurance companies, a lot of mental health issues, and thank goodness for telehealth that's available, and I do provide telehealth services as well. But they documented teen mental health claims nearly doubled. Hear me, it nearly doubled during the pandemic. Teenagers and adolescents that were needing to go see a psychologist or needing some sort of counseling. So it highlighted some of the staggering effect that the pandemic had. And that report, by the way, only got information from privately owned health insurance claims, not some of the public claims through Medicaid, etc. And so government issued. So if we look at those numbers, I can only imagine what those numbers would look like, just with the sharp rise in mental health difficulties. And so some of the most noted issues for kids and for adults, mind you, but particularly for teenagers, included anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. So trying to organize their life or control some aspects when their life felt totally out of control. Schizophrenia, there was a sharp increase in schizophrenia issues, and substance abuse as well. So that's not just during the time period, but also since that time, now that kids are back in school. And Christian young people, and I know that Landon does a great job here, and Brandon does a great job with the college-age young professionals as well. But Christian young people are not immune from depression, right? Just like none of us are immune from mental health issues just because we're a Christian. And it doesn't mean that we have a lack of faith. It just means that we're going through a struggle that's often chemical related or neurochemically related. And so there's several biblical characters that I think about that had mental health issues along the way. If you dig beneath the surface and read between the lines of the narratives of Scripture, people like Moses and Elijah who was suicidal at times, David dealing with grief, loss, depression, some of it connected to sin, mind you, but other times just fear that he was dealing with. Hannah, who was childless or barren. Apostle Paul speaks about the anxieties he had for the churches and some of those issues that came up. And of course, he was in prison, right, for a lengthy period of time. So dealing with some of those issues. In 1 Kings 19, if we just think about Elijah, and for sake of time, I'm not going to read the passage, but in the passage, we see that the context there is Elijah has just been on Mount Carmel, literally a mountaintop experience, and he has defeated the prophets of Baal and Asherah, and Ahab, the king of Israel, has been, and his wife Jezebel have been humiliated by Elijah as he's called on fire from heaven and burned up the sacrifices that were placed there in this competition with the giant. I call this the biggest Super Bowl ever. I mean, it was good against evil. And immediately after that, after a 3-year period of no rain, Elijah prays and God sends a cloud and it's about to start to rain. And we'd think Elijah has just been vindicated. But not so. Jezebel is after his life, because you may remember that Elijah not only defeated, but he killed these different these false prophets. And so he is on the run, and he is scared, verse 3. He is suicidal, verse 4. He tells God, I don't want to live anymore. Verse 5 through 8, we see how God strengthens him with food and rest. But food, he sends, the birds send him things to eat, and there's angelic care for him. And we see him self-pitying. He gets into this woe is me state. He is down in the dumps. And then finally God says, I'm not done with you yet. There's another king for you to anoint, or there are kings for you to anoint. There's a protege for you to go get called Elisha, who's going to take over from you. And there's still 7,000 among Israel who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So God gives Elijah a much needed shot in the arm of spiritual and psychological and physical renewal during an incredibly difficult time for one of these great prophets who appeared on the mountain with Jesus in the Mount of Transfiguration there in Matthew. And so Depression affects how you feel, think, behave. It can affect the emotional, functional, and physical problems that kids and adults are dealing with. And so symptoms for young people in particular, I'd like to walk through just a few of these. Under the emotional aspect, there's often feelings of sadness, which can lead to crying spells when there seems to be no reason for it, but they're just sad. Frustration or feelings of anger over making mountains out of molehills, feeling hopeless or empty, irritable or annoyed, loss of interest or pleasure in activities that they used to find interest or pleasure in, loss of interest in or conflict with family and friends, low self-esteem, going on, feelings of worthlessness and guilt, fixation on past failures or exaggerated self-blame or self-criticism, extreme sensitivity to rejection or failure, the need for excessive reassurance that everything is going to be okay, trouble thinking, concentrating, making decisions, or even remembering things. And I'm going to get into that a bit more tomorrow when we talk about anxiety. An ongoing sense that life and the future are grim and bleak. There's nothing to look forward to. Frequent thoughts of death, dying, or suicide. And we'll talk more about suicide tomorrow and some of those issues with kids. So that's the emotional changes. Behaviorally, tiredness or lack of energy, insomnia, or sleeping too much. Changes in appetite, either decreased appetite and weight loss or eating too much, right, and weight gain. So it can go either way. There's normally no happy medium. Use of alcohol or drugs. Agitation or restlessness, for example, pacing, hand-wringing, or the inability to sit still. Slowed thinking, speaking, body movements. Frequent complaints of unexpected or unexplained body aches and headaches, social isolation, poor school performance, frequent absences from school, less attention to personal hygiene or appearance, angry outbursts, disruptive or risky behavior, or other acting out types of behaviors, self-harm, for example, cutting or burning, which we'll talk about later, making a suicide plan or a suicide attempt. And so all these different symptoms that are out there, and if a kid just has one of those, we don't want to overshoot something, but if they've got 4 or 5 or 6 of those different symptoms, there might be something going on that we need to pay really close attention to. And their life might be in jeopardy. So some causes of teen depression, we've mentioned brain chemistry, so dopamine and serotonin deficits that are there. And we know that depression it's heritable. So it can be inherited, right, from the previous generation. There's often a genetic component to mental health issues, particularly depression. Hormones can trigger different types of depression, whether female hormones or with males, androgens and some imbalances with the female or the male hormones. Inherited traits, early childhood trauma that might now be remembered, and so it's triggering something, whether it's triggering even bipolar issues, but particularly major depressive disorder. Learned patterns of negative thinking. In AA, what do they call that? Stinking thinking, which is not viewing reality through a clear lens, looking at everything through a negative lens. So the story I'd like to tell is about these twin boys, and their dad was a psychologist. And so upon their 7th birthday, their dad, who decided he wanted to do an experiment on his kids. And the basis for the experiment was the one son was an eternal optimist. I mean, he always saw the glass half full. But the other twin was a doom and gloom pessimist. Everything was woe is me. It was the worst day ever, right? So on their birthday, the father decides to do this little trick, this little experiment to see what will happen with the boys. So with the boy that's the optimist, he fills up his bedroom with horse manure. Goes in, it's just horse manure in his bedroom. The other son, the pessimist, the depressed one, he fills his room up with all these new toys. I mean, these wonderful toys. And so the boys come home from school. The dad goes and he walks into the room of the pessimist, and that the young son, 7-year-old now, he's sitting there in the middle of the floor, and he's just weeping and just saying, "Oh, this is the worst day ever." And his dad, "Well, how come, son? You got all these toys for your birthday." He says, "Well, the toys are eventually going to break, and then what am I going to do once they wear out? And some of them need batteries. I know the batteries are those are expensive." And he says, I don't have space in my toy box or my closet to put all this stuff. My room's a mess." He said, "This is the worst day ever." His dad thinks, well, that figures. He is a pessimist after all. So he walks down the hall to the other son's room, and he hears some commotion going on behind the closed door. So he opens the door, and the optimist is in there, and he's in the middle of the horse manure. He's going, woo! He's throwing up the horse manure, and it's the best day ever. And his dad says, "What in the world is going on in here?" And the boy goes, "There's got to be a pony in here somewhere." So, too bad there wasn't. But, you know, the way we view the world and the lenses through which we see things, our perspective greatly impacts our attitude and our behavior and our feelings. And so family history and issues with family or others can cause depressed feelings to come. And so along the areas of prevention and just how do we help young people in the congregation, whether it's your child or a nephew or niece or a grandchild or just a young person that you're trying to mentor, that's part of this congregation, a part of the community in which you live. We want to help our young people. And young people, if you're here and you've got a close friend, or maybe it's you that's have some struggles with depressed feelings, you've got to take some steps to control stress, right? And some of those steps might be not taking on as much as you've been taking on. It might be learning certain types of breathing exercises and things that you can do to manage the stress in a better way. And again, I'll speak more about that tomorrow. So I'm going to save some of those techniques. So you better come back with some of the good stuff tomorrow on how to do it. But taking steps to control it, practicing self-care. Self-care involves sleep. I'm going to repeat that. Self-care involves sleep. Getting sleep. You show me a young person that is not getting enough sleep, and I'll show you a young person that's not faring too well in their mental health. Last week at Frida Hardeman, it was Making Music Week, and a large portion of our student body were involved through their social clubs in the different performances, and it was great. And I helped with the social club. Actually, the summer intern I discovered for this coming summer is actually in that social club called Omega Chi. So I'm one of the sponsors for that group, and we have a blast together. But it was Monday morning. It was this week, Monday morning. I've got an 8:30 class. And that's rough, right? 8:30 on a Monday morning for college students. It's the book of Acts that I'm teaching. And there's usually about 40 in the class. And so I got up to teach, and I looked out over the students sitting in the class, and they looked like death warmed up. I mean, I could just tell these guys are worn out from the weekend. And so I just took a little poll. I said, how many of you over the last couple of days cumulatively have gotten 6 or less hours of sleep. About a third of the class raised their hand that over the past 48 hours, they'd got less than 6 hours of sleep. I kept on going, down through the list, adding how many. Most of them were operating on, per night, about 5 hours or less. The only guy that raised his hand when I said, how many of you over the last couple of days have gotten about 16 to 18 hours or more of sleep? One guy in the back raised his hand. His name's Peyton Law. I looked at Peyton and I said, that figures, Peyton. Because Peyton's one of the stars on our basketball team at Fraser Hardeman. He knows how to take care of his body, right? How to get the rest he needs and the food and the fuel that he needs. And so self-care involves sleep and exercise and a healthy diet, reaching out for friendship and social support, not trying to isolate. Isolation is a killer among kids. Getting treatment, if necessary, from a counselor or a medical doctor if medication may be required. Maintaining ongoing treatment if recommended. I had a wonderful young man come up to me the other day. I was walking to chapel, and he's a freshman at Freed, and just an outstanding Christian young man, handsome, smart, hard worker, great work ethic. He said, hey, Dr. Fraser, can I talk to you a little bit today? So we were walking, we were running late. I said, I'll tell you what, let's go find a seat. I'll sit by you in chapel and we can talk after chapel. So he said, all right. So sat by him in chapel, and then we walked out, and he said, look, he said, I've been, for the last couple of years, he said, I've been feeling very low, just, feeling depressed. He said, I've tried everything. He said, I've gone to counseling. He said, I'm exercising regularly. I'm eating really, healthy. He said, I'm trying to be around other people and not isolate. He said, how can I, and this was his language, how can I hand this over to God? How can I hand this over to God? Great question. You can tell me his heart was. I want to give this over to God, the way I'm feeling. I said to him, look, that's great, and I want you to hand it over to God. But I said, I'm going to put on my counselor hat for a moment. He said, you've been doing everything right, but it sounds like you're clinically depressed. If you're dealing with this every day, and you're waking up tired, and you're feeling you got these issues, I said, you need to go to the doctor. Let's get you in there, because you probably need to be on some meds to help. He said, I've wondered about that. So maybe his cry for help was, I'm so glad we spoke. Because there's been times, he said, it's been a little while, but he was feeling a little bit suicidal too. He's had some thoughts. So great kid, wonderful Christian young man. But you can't sweep it under the rug. And I wasn't going to tell him, hey, you just need to pray more, read your Bible more. He was already doing that. He's already praying and reading his Bible. He's doing all the right things. But need for a little bit more. So I think reality is our friend. We need to be realists about some of these issues that come up. So how to help depressed teenagers? These all start with P. Landon knows that I love alliteration, all right? So these all start with P. That's the preacher in me coming out, the Billy Smith training that I got back in the day in preaching. First is presence. Be present to your kids or to those kids that need to talk. Don't blow them off or minimize. If they say or you pick up some things, ask them about it. If you're at church, I will go up to a kid at Fraser Hardeman. If they're not looking right, I'll go up to them and say, hey, what is going on? I can tell something's not right. We need to be present and then give them the time that they need just to listen. Praying with them. Prayer is powerful. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. right? James mentions that as he's talking in James chapter 5, actually about Elijah, who we mentioned a moment ago, a righteous man who was also dealing with depression. But prayer is powerful. Patience, be patient with our young people. Understand that this might be a lifelong struggle for them. Perspective, helping give a positive perspective, a biblical perspective. You got a Bible on you? Open up quickly to Philippians 4. I'd love to take a look at this with my clients and those that just come to talk. I'm going to come and sit down and have a chat. It says this in Philippians 4, verse 8. It says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. What you've heard or learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. Our focus, our perspective is really important, and to take young people and maybe take ourselves back into the Word and take every thought that we have, especially those distorted thoughts, take every thought we have captive for Christ. 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5. And so helping with perspective. And then persistence. We need to persist. Follow up, in other words, follow up with those that we're concerned about. Make sure that they are going to be okay. So I've just got to cut, since I'm not going to be getting into suicide much tonight, but I will tomorrow. I've just got a couple of slides for those that will not be able to be here tomorrow, just to give something to hang on to, all right? Because depression is the number one reason why somebody in America attempts to take their life about every 14 minutes, right? So, and among young people. So take the time to offer help, listen non-judgmentally, trust your instincts, your intuition. Pick up that something doesn't seem to be right with my niece or my nephew or my son or granddaughter. Listen carefully to what the young person's saying and to what they're not saying. Seek external professional help. Always err on the side of caution. Oh, I'd rather be safe than sorry every time when it comes to depression issues and particularly suicidal thinking. In 2022, a brand new number came out, and it was a longer number that you could text. It was just for help, HELP, but now they've changed this, and you can still use that, but just 988. 988. The Suicide and Crisis Lifeline has been designated as the new 3-digit dialing code that will route callers to the National Suicide Prevention Lifelines. Now are available throughout the U.S. People, what I love about it is people can call it, they can text, or they can chat with 988. So they're using multiple platforms for it, and they're connected to a trained counselor. So what a great resource for somebody that needs help now, right? And 911 is great too, but maybe they just need to talk it through with a trained counselor. So 988. And they'll listen, understand how their problems are affecting them, provide support, and connect them to the resources that are necessary. All right? I'm going to pause right there. We're doing great in time. We're going to take a few minutes now. We're going to switch gears. Thanks for listening so well. I know if you're like me, I'm looking forward to the coffee here in just a second. I'm keeping you from that. But we're going to take a few minutes just to take some questions, and I'll try and be as honest and open as I can.
So if anyone has questions for Dr. Fraser, raise a hand and I'll come over with the mic and you can ask.
So if you suspect a child's having difficulty and you want them to try to get them to talk to you, and you just are saying you'll listen, you're always there to listen, how do you get them to open up and talk?
Yeah. It depends on, first of all, thank you for that question. Great question. And some kids are going to be more open than others. You know, some kids are going to be kind of hold their cards a bit closer. I think the secret to that is in the relationship, that we form a trusting relationship. And I would say something, you know, to a young person, especially one that is maybe a little less forthcoming with what's going on. I'll say, look, you know, I care a lot about you. I've noticed this, and this. I would name what I've noticed. I've noticed these things. I'm really concerned. And it may be nothing, but it may be something. And I just want to be here for you, to hear what's going on in your life, not to judge you, but to see if I can help. And I want you to know that I've only got your best interests at heart. And I hope you feel like you can trust me to tell me what's on your heart right now. All we can do is initiate. Just like God initiates into our life, into the world, all the time, God is always initiating. But as free moral agents, people they've got the right to resist that initiation. And so, you know, all we can do is ask. It's like with that young man that I was speaking the other day. I said, look, I will be happy to go to the doctor with you. That they know me down at the clinic. We've shared patients. I'll be happy to go with you, but I don't want to overstep. You know how to get a hold of me. I will go. Here's the contact information. But ultimately, that's got to be your decision. And I was really glad that a couple of days later, I got this quick text. Hey, what's the address again for the? So I knew he was following. I was going to follow up, right? But he beat me to the punch, and I thought that was great. But and then some kids, you know, are just not going to talk, and I guess that's a prerogative. Now, another side of this, and I'm talking too much here, but another side of this is if we can tell, and we're following our gut and our instinct, everything tells us something is bad, wrong here. Yeah, we can force somebody. We can take somebody against their will to go see a counselor or a doctor. Not the best thing in the world, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes, you know, if they're not in their right mind, we've got to step in and be the responsible party, and we do have a legal right to do that. Great question, thank you. Any others? Boy, the rain is coming down. I'm glad we're in the ark, so I feel safe. Are you leaving? Oh no, We've known Landon and Haley for a long time, and did their premarital counseling, so it was fun. Yes.
I just wanted to say, can you hear? Is this working? Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
I just wanted to say thanks for mentioning the need maybe for medication, because the problems I was having, I went to all different kinds of counselors over and over again, and you know, you would think it should help, but it just wasn't working for me, and eventually I had to go to a psychiatrist and went through numerous meds until I found something that could help. And so even then you have to have patience, but finally found something that worked great. And I think one of the problems with me is in the past, I've been on something I think, wow, this is great, you know, and I don't really need this. Then you go off of it again. And I think if counseling works, that's great. And definitely should be tried first or with medication. But I think people need to realize that sometimes you need to go beyond that.
Amen. Hey, thank you for being so transparent. That's really helpful, you know, and Yeah, that's, and I appreciate you saying, other things need to be tried first. That's normally my last. But with this young man, I could tell he'd already done everything that I would have told him to do, right? He'd already been in counseling. So just a little backstory here. My wife and I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It actually came out right before COVID. It's called Overcoming the Blues. And so I traveled around the U.S. speaking about that in churches and for different groups. But in the Overcoming the Blues, I tell the story about my wife and her battle with clinical depression. And get the book. It's but there's just a lot to it. Finally, Missy, through a series of events that I don't have time to get into now, but through a series of events, plus the fact that she stopped buckling her seatbelt because she wasn't actively suicidal, but she was passively suicidal. She wanted to die. And finally, here I am as a therapist and minister, and I felt helpless, to know how to help her. But she opened up to her kidney doctor. Missy's a kidney transplant survivor, and opened up to her nephrologist. She said to Dr. Heidi Schaefer at Vanderbilt, she said, I've got a husband that loves me. I've got kids that adore me. I've got a great job, a great church family at North Jackson at the time. She said, but I just cannot, I just feel like I'm so low. I just can't function. And the doctor said, look, sometimes with kidney transplant issues or other transplant patients, it can trigger depressions, but said, you're clinically depressed. We need to get you on meds. And my wife is a proponent because when she's not, it's rough. It's rough. So I appreciate, people in the church and elders and others that I've worked with over the years that have wanted to quit the eldership. They said, I'm dealing with depression. I'm saying, look, do I need to put my minister hat on or my counselor hat on right now? Let's get you on the right meds, and some of these folks have stayed in the eldership, and some of the best people in the world because they understand. They know how to connect with others that are dealing with this from a first-hand perspective, and that, my friend, is powerful. When you're able to care out of the care you've received, as 2 Corinthians 1 tells us, with the comfort we've received, we pass it forward. So keep on keeping on. It's awesome.
So if you have someone who's of legal age and been actually court ordered to get counseling, but the counselor that they use and that they like is a fruitcake, what do you do?
That sounds like a loaded question. I've met some counselors that are like mixed brand. It's like fruits, flakes, and nuts, But yeah, there are some that are, especially in the secular world, that I wouldn't send my kid to or wouldn't want to go to myself. If they're mandated, I would strongly recommend, maybe seeing if they can be referred but obviously if they're of age, you can only persuade so much, right? But some counselors are going to tell people what they want to hear rather than what they need to hear. And I wish I had the answer to this one. Let's say refer them to somebody else, though, is what I would recommend if they would go. I'm going to leave that alone. It's loaded. It's a ticking time bomb. What else do we have? Guys, that's great. Let's pause and take maybe about, how long of a break is it going to be?
Yeah, let's take about 10 minutes. We'll meet back here at 8 o'clock.
All right, so let's take 15 minutes. Come back about 8:05. All right, sounds good.